have to put the focus on the community, not on the organization. Yes, you want the resources for the organization to fulfill its mission and to do great things, but focusing on the community and the impacts that you're going to bring the community, I think, is absolutely critical.
That's the voice of Tom DiFiore of National Community Development Services, here to talk with us about arguably one of the most foundational topics for delivering on your mission, and that's raising money. Whether you're new to our industry or a veteran, lots of good tips and reminders here from an expert for the next time you're out securing community support for your chamber or EDO. I'm Amanda Ellis, and you're listening to Inside America's Best Cities, a podcast for chamber, economic development, and talent attraction professionals. Learn more about this podcast at livabilitymedia.com. And with that, let's jump in. Tom, welcome to Inside America's Best Cities.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We're super excited to chat with you and cover a topic we have not talked much about on the podcast yet thus far. So your organization, National Community Development Services, what do you all do?
Well, the short answer is we raise money for chambers, economic development organizations, Main Street organizations, basically anybody that's in community development and trying to help their community prosper. But fundraiser sounds, it's got a connotation that sounds a little smarmy sometimes. So I like to think that what we really do is that we help organizations secure resources that allow them to do far more in their communities than they can ever imagine to do with traditional funding sources like membership and sponsorships.
Yeah, what else would you say about what makes you all special? Because I know there are several resources out there for this sort of thing. So what do you all do that's different and makes you an especially great resource for these groups to tap into?
Yeah, well, I think, Amanda, one of the biggest values we bring to our clients, and I really look at our clients as the communities, not the organizations. But what we really do is we help organizations, primarily in small and mid-sized communities, punch above their weight. Our approach typically provides them with resources that allow them to operate like far bigger communities and really move the needle when it comes to aggressive, robust plans and efforts.
Well, and I feel like the fundraising part can be something that's a little uncomfortable for people depending on their backgrounds, right? Even though you have to have resources to accomplish your strategic plan and accomplish what you're trying to contribute to the community. What are some common misconceptions or misperceptions about chamber and economic development fundraising that you see?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And this may sound like a shameless plug, so I apologize in advance. But probably the most common misperception is that it's cost prohibitive. Some people, when they hear the word fundraiser, they think of telemarketers and these mass appeal fundraisers who keep, frankly, a criminal percentage of funds that they raise on behalf of their clients. We don't do that. And in fact, when we're done, most of our clients end up with a 5% or less cost when you add in fees and expenses and everything. Typically, what they pay us will be 5% or less of what we raise. And even in smaller communities of 25,000 people or less, we'll typically end up, the cost of monies raised is below 10%. And the other big misperception I think about firms like NCDS is that what they're really buying is a hired gun solicitor. And the reality is that our value and our success is really rooted in the front end design and engineering of the campaigns. And if you do all that right, the actual ask or solicitation is quite natural and frankly easy.
So thinking about our listeners, how do they know whether they should DIY something or whether they should be engaging that outside support?
It's kind of like doing your taxes. You can do your own taxes if you want, but do you really want the pain and suffering that come with it?
No.
Yeah. But I would recommend that people start from the place of, why are we proposing to, embark on an aggressive, ambitious fundraising effort? Is it to really move the needle on strategies and efforts that will impact the community and make the place better? Or is it simply to fund an organization? If it's the latter, it's obviously a non-starter. But if it really is about moving the needle on the community's economic future, theoretically, there's no reason they can't do it themselves. But a couple of things I would caution against or to think about. Number one is staff, time, and resources. Chambers of commerce and economic development organizations aren't, they're not bloated with staff. And typically something of this magnitude is going to have to be done by the CEO or a very senior person. And those people are hired and paid to be a CEO or be an economic developer. They're not hired and paid to be a fundraiser. This is not a part-time job. They can't be a CEO 6 hours a day and a fundraiser 2 hours a day or 4 days a week and 1 day a week. The other thing I would say is that sometimes they will make the mistake of, well, we have memberships, salespeople, they can go run one of these campaigns. You do need a pretty high level of professionalism and expertise to do this. And the other thing I would say is, when you're thinking about do it ourselves or otherwise, is cost effectiveness. We're a high ticket item, but we're in and out in 8 or 10 months, and they've got 4 or 5 years of resources on the back end of it. If you hire someone to do this, you're probably going to have them on the payroll with benefits and everything else for 4 or 5 years. And oftentimes that doesn't make sense. And then the last I would say is this idea of urgency. A campaign by definition starts here and ends here. And when it's internal staff doing it, the people in the community sort of lose that sense of urgency and, I'll get back to them and, they're not going anywhere. So you tend to have the never ending campaigns.
You touched a little bit on the messaging around this sort of thing and the nature of, are you fundraising to fund an organization or to fund a mission, essentially? So thinking about that and like strategic planning versus fundraising, which a lot of times those things go together, I feel like strategic planning kind of makes people cringe a little bit because it sounds really big and time consuming. How much time really needs to go into that? And can you just kind of talk about the relationship between those two things?
And that's really the crux of the issue. And we could spend the whole podcast talking about just this, but I'll try to kind of synopsize it. Obviously, you can't ask for money without telling people how you're going to spend it. So you do have to have some level of plan in place. But I caution people about getting too far down into a very expensive, very time-consuming strategic planning process. And more importantly, I guess, don't look at strategic planning as sort of a standalone. We follow strategic planners, and there are great ones out there, and they do great strategic plans. But I always prefer it when clients begin the strategic planning process with at least an eye toward fundraising. Because if they do that, the strategic plan will have a couple things that help us. Number one, the right people will have their fingerprints on it. You don't want to engage an expensive strategic plan and get all this expertise, the proverbial book on the shelf, and none of the top leaders have really been involved in the process. And I guess number two, certainly you want to have the strategic plan needs to come with some costs of implementation, because if you have this great plan and everybody's all excited about it, but then we're like, okay, well, is this going to cost us $2 million or $10 million or $20 million to implement? You need to have some idea when you go to fund it. And then finally, I would say make sure, as good as that strategic plan may be, don't look at the end of it as the completion of it, because the most valuable thing we do is take whatever level of plan an organization has and we shop it. We market test it to the community. That's the feasibility study and the goal assessment. And we do very high level confidential interviews, and we get a lot of good feedback, and we find out which parts of that plan resonate or don't resonate with the people who are going to be asked to fund it. So when we take that to the street, we market proposed discussion draft so that people think, it's not cast in stone. We really do want their input. And with that input and the data we get, we'll further refine it before we actually take it to go ask for money behind it.
Along those lines, is there anything that Chamber EDO staff tend to think resonates with stakeholders more than it actually does?
Typically, especially in the chamber world, I think they look at, because this is what they're accustomed to and trained to, is they look at the idea of recognition. So we see a lot of organizations that tout the gold, silver, and platinum memberships. And, for this, you get your name, on the landing page of the website, and you get your logo and lights at the annual meeting. And for this kind of fundraising, for funding these plans, I would recommend that you don't mistake the prospect's marketing interests for the sort of the transformational value of the plan that you're going to fund. So, the idea that for a 5-year pledge of $100,000, you're going to give that investor all these great marketing benefits, those do not resonate, at least to the degree that would merit the kind of really big money that we tend to raise. It has to be about what's the plan, what's the impact, what's the outcome. And yes, it will benefit the community, but it will benefit different companies in different industries more. And that's how we like to look at what the appropriate investment is. In fact, we actually will tell prospects often when they kind of, blink at the number we're asking, we say, look, this isn't intended to come out of your marketing budget. This is much more and much different. So, that idea of finding the splash benefits and recognition and name and light sort of thing doesn't resonate the way a lot of staff people think it should.
I know you've been doing this almost 2 decades, right? Or around 2 decades?
Actually, more. We've been in business for almost 50 years. I've been doing it for about 25.
So, what are some things that you've seen shift in terms of stakeholder priorities in your time of doing this and working with chambers?
I guess you start by looking at, well, what is a stakeholder? Well, by definition, a stakeholder is a business that expects their local business organization to make their community better for their bottom line. And there's a lot of different things that go into that. 25 years ago, it was, 90 to 100% job creation. It was all about the buffalo hunt. So most of the money we raised was, whether it would be marketing campaigns or travel, sucking up the site selectors, all those sort of things that were almost purely about business recruitment and mostly in the area of industrial recruitment and attraction. Fast forward to today, sure, job creation is still an important metric for scorekeeping. But as we all know, you have a lot more communities, a lot more organizations focused on quality of life type things. In fact, lists like yours oftentimes are the goals of our clients. They will state, when we raise this money, one of our goals is to be on the top 10 best places to live or best small towns or whatever. And within that quality of life and place-based sort of initiatives, you've got a whole menu of potential strategies that get funded. And I'm really impressed, frankly, with a lot of the creative things that some of these communities do. A lot of the workforce and talent initiatives, it may include something as simple as, a war chest of money to help companies incentivize employees to move there. It really has shifted from that pure buffalo hunt to, how do we put our community on the map and make it more attractive to workers or to train the workers we have.
It's interesting to see all the different issues that these groups are plugging in on. What's one of the more unique campaigns that you've gotten to work on?
Well, I don't know that I could pick one. I've seen a lot of creative uses for the money we've raised, and it really goes to this point of, what we're about is addressing the needs or opportunities of a given community at a given point in time, and those are, across the board. I can recall one community that was in danger. They had a small community. They had air service to a hub airport 3 flights a day that was critical to their economy, obviously. They were in danger of losing it because their runways weren't in compliance with what the FAA needed. And the FAA was going to put about $80 million into, bringing this runway up to speed, but they needed a community match. And so the community had to come up with about $5 million in order to access $80 million from the FAA to ensure that they kept air service. Another really cool one was a smaller community whose schools were part of their, they identified schools as part of their problem. They set aside about $400,000 of what we raised to supplement teacher pay. So they thought their teachers were underpaid. So the Chamber of Commerce actually said, we're going to help pay our teachers more so that we can attract and keep better teachers. We've done several incubators, which I think is really cool. And actually a couple housing initiatives where, a chamber and economic development organization actually said, none of the developers are building what we need in the area of housing. So we're kind of become the developer of record to build some, starter home, cluster homes, townhome type stuff.
Any unique or new like funding models or just different approaches to fundraising that our listeners might like to hear about?
I don't know that there's anything new or unique. At the end of the day, fundraising is all about relationships and, making your case and what you're going to do with the money and prove value. But I will say that in the arena that we work in the chamber and economic development world, our model that's proven very successful, it's not new. We started this about 20 years ago, but we actually have an economist on staff who uses Implan, which the listeners probably are familiar with Implan. It's an economic modeling software. And what we do is we take a client's proposed program of work that we're funding. We put some goals around jobs and incomes and populations and things like that, run it through the Implan model, and actually it spits out a very compelling economic impact, which allows us to go to dozens of industries and obviously companies within those industries and say, look, when we're successful, when we implement this program, here's what it means to you. And we can go right to their bottom line, say, based on your industry, based on your, average profit margin and based on your market share, we think an investment of $50,000 over 5 years, the return for you is going to be X. It's very powerful. And it does separate this kind of fundraising from the traditional sort of nonprofit, warm glow in the heart, feel good stuff. This is if we can't make a business case, then we have no business asking for money.
It's true. So volunteers can be a big part of these types of campaigns. How do you all engage volunteers with this? Can you talk about that?
Would love to. And I guess the short answer is that we engage them very carefully and very strategically. We're good at what we do, but we have to have that local influence. And I would say that the volunteers that can move the needle for us in these campaigns really probably have 4 attributes, if you will, that we need and hopefully cultivate. One is they have to be bought in and committed to the plan. And there's a difference between endorsement and buy-in. If they just endorse or approve it, it's not going to work. They got to really buy into it. The second thing is that they obviously have to invest at fair and proportionate levels. Doesn't mean they all have to be, you don't have to have your 5 biggest investors as your volunteers, but every volunteer you have has to invest at what we call fair and proportionate level for his or her company. Because if they don't, it's token. They're really not, they don't care if you win or lose. But when they've got skin in the game, they want to make sure you win, and they're going to do everything they can to help you. Thirdly, they obviously have to have a high degree of influence and credibility, ideally across the community, but at a minimum within their peer network or industry. And then I guess the last thing that they have to have is they have to be willing to send a message that this is a top community priority. They're invested, they're committed, and they need other people too. So if we get that, we don't really need them to do a lot. Most of them don't like asking for money. Most of them aren't very good at asking for money. So we are pretty good at leveraging those things with our ability to make a professional ask. And ultimately, we have to make it easy and enjoyable for them, because if we don't, they're not going to participate. And if they don't participate, we don't have a winning campaign.
It's true. If you could leave our listeners, Tom, with one piece of advice on this topic, what would it be?
And I guess I put this in the category, if the shoe fits, wear it. You have to put the focus on the community, not on the organization. Yes, you want the resources for the organization to fulfill its mission and to do great things, but focusing on the community and the impacts that you're going to bring the community, I think is absolutely critical. And sometimes that's, believe it or not, that's hard for some people to do, because they've been trained, I'm judged by how many new members the chamber gets this year, and how many members we have, and what's our budget and all that. This is not about building an organization for the sake of building organizations. It's about making the organization, giving the organization the capacity it needs to deliver impacts and benefits for the community that it serves.
Yes. Well, Tom, we always wrap up our episodes with a fun question. So you're based in Atlanta, Alpharetta specifically, is that right?
Correct.
Gotcha. So if someone were visiting the area for the first time, you can either think about Alpharetta, exactly where you are, or Atlanta in general. What's something that they should make sure to do, like a bucket list item that's maybe a little bit outside of what they would immediately think of tourist things?
Wow. That's a hard one. If it were me, I would answer probably one of the great golf courses that we have, but I'll channel my wife and suggest the Botanical Garden, which it is a tourist attraction, but it's not one of the ones that people typically think of. And I am by no means a botanist or, a flower lover, but you can go spend a couple hours there. And I understand it's great all times of the year, different times of the year, different things are blooming, and they have different programs and attractions. So that's one that probably isn't on most people's bucket list, Gibbs Gardens.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for dropping in to share some good fundraising insights. Like I said, this isn't a topic we've done much on, and I think will be really helpful for our listeners.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Livability Podcast, where we take you inside America's best cities. At Livability, we highlight the unsung awesomeness of small and mid-sized cities across the country. We also partner with communities to reach their target companies and potential residents through digital content and print magazine programs. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, rate, and review this show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also learn more about us at livabilitymedia.com. Have an idea for an upcoming episode? Email me at aellis@livability.com. Until next time, from Livability, I'm Amanda Ellis, sharing the stories of America's most promising places.